Hello everyone. This video is on the first chapter of Laxmikanth's Indian polity book, Historical Background. Let's start. The Britishers came to India in 1608 as traders in the form of East India Company. The East India Company had the exclusive right to trade in India as per a charter granted by Queen Elizabeth I in 1600. In 1764, the company won the Battle of Buxar against the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam. Therefore, in 1765, Shah Alam granted the Diwani rights of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Diwani rights were the rights to collect taxes and decide over civil cases. This started the company's career as a territorial power in India. In 1858, in the wake of the Sepoy Mutiny or the First War of Independence, the British Crown assumed direct responsibility for the governance of India. This rule continued in India until independence, that is, on August 15, 1947. The British rule in India can be divided into two major headings. 1. The Company Rule from 1773 to 1858. 2. The Crown Rule from 1858 to 1947. Under both the Company Rule and the Crown Rule, various acts were brought. Let's have a look at each one of them in a chronological order. Acts brought under the Company Rule. Regulating Act of 1773. This act was of great constitutional importance as it was the first step taken by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of East India Company. The features of this act were: 1. It designated the Governor of Bengal as the Governor General of Bengal and created an executive council of 4 members to assist him. The first such Governor General was Lord Warren Hastings. 2. It made the governors of Bombay and Madras presidencies subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal. 3. It provided for the establishment of a Supreme Court at Calcutta, comprising of 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. 4. It prohibited the servants of the company from engaging in any private trade or accepting presents or bribes from the natives. 5. It strengthened the control of the British government over the company by requiring the Court of Directors to report on its revenue, civil and military affairs in India. Amending Act of 1781. This act was brought in a bid to rectify the defects of the Regulating Act of 1773. This act is also known as the Act of Settlement. The features of this act were: 1. It exempted the Governor General and the Council from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for the acts done by them in their official capacity. Similarly, it also exempted the servants of the company from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for their official actions. 2. It excluded the revenue matters and the matters arising in the collection of revenue from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. 3. It provided that the Supreme Court was to have jurisdiction over all the inhabitants of Calcutta. It also required the court to administer the personal law of the defendants, that is, Hindus were to be treated according to the Hindu law and Muslims were to be tried according to the Mohammedan law. 4. It laid down that the appeals from the provincial courts could be taken to the Governor General in Council and not to the Supreme Court. 5. It empowered the Governor General in Council to frame regulations for the provincial courts and councils. Pitt's India Act of 1784. This act was significant for two reasons. First, the company's territories in India were for the first time called the British possessions in India. And second, the British government was given the supreme control over companies' affairs and its administration in India. The features of this act were: 1. It distinguished between the commercial and political functions of the company. 2. It allowed the Court of Directors to manage the commercial affairs but created a new body called Board of Control to manage the political affairs. Thus, it established a system of double government. 3. It empowered the Board of Control to supervise and direct all operations of the civil and military government or revenues of the British possessions in India. Act of 1786. In 1786, Lord Cornwallis was appointed as the Governor General of Bengal. He placed two demands to accept that post. 1. He should be given powers to override the decision of his council in special cases. 2. He would also be the Commander-in-Chief. Accordingly, the Act of 1786 was enacted to make both the provisions. Charter Act of 1793. The features of this act were: 1. It extended the overriding powers given to Lord Cornwallis over his council to all future Governor Generals and Governors of Presidencies. 2. It gave the Governor General more powers and control over the governments of the subordinate presidencies of Bombay and Madras. 3. It extended the trade monopoly of the company in India for another period of 20 years. That is, the exclusive right to trade in India given to the East India Company was extended for another 20 years. 4. It provided that the Commander-in-Chief was not to be a member of the Governor General's Council unless he was so appointed. 5. It laid down that the members of the Board of Control and their staff were henceforth to be paid out of the Indian revenues. Charter Act of 1813. The features of this act were: 1. It abolished the trade monopoly of the company in India. That is, the Indian trade was thrown open to all British merchants. However, it continued the monopoly of the company over trade in tea and trade with China. 2. It asserted the sovereignty of the British Crown over the company's territories in India. 3. It allowed the Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of enlightening the people. 4. It provided for the spread of Western education among the inhabitants of the British territories in India. 5. It authorized the local governments in India to impose taxes on persons. They could also punish the persons for not paying taxes. Charter Act of 1833. This act was the final step towards centralization in British India. The features of this act were: 1. It made the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India and vested in him all civil and military powers. Thus, the act created for the first time Government of India having authority over the entire territorial area possessed by the British in India. Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. 2. It deprived the Governor of Bombay and Madras of their legislative powers. The Governor General of India was given the exclusive legislative powers for the entire British India. The laws made under the previous acts were called as regulations, while laws made under this act were called as acts. 3. It ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, which became a purely administrative body. It provided that the company's territories in India were held by it in trust for His Majesty, his heirs and successors. 4. The Charter Act of 1833 attempted to introduce a system of open competition for selection of civil servants and stated that the Indians should not be debarred from holding any place, office and employment under the company. However, this provision was negated after opposition from the Court of Directors. Charter Act of 1853. This was the last of the series of Charter Acts passed by the British Parliament between 1793 and 1853. It was a significant constitutional landmark. The features of this act were: 1. It separated for the first time the legislative and executive functions of the Governor General's Council. It provided for addition of 6 new members called Legislative Councillors to the Council. In other words, it established a separate Governor General's Legislative Council, which came to be known as the Indian Legislative Council. This legislative wing of the Council functioned as a mini parliament, adopting the same procedures as the British Parliament. Thus, legislation for the first time was treated as a special function of the government, requiring special machinery and special process. 2. It introduced an open competition system of selection and recruitment of civil servants. The convenanted civil service was thus thrown open to the Indians also. Accordingly, the Macaulay Committee was appointed in 1854. 3. It extended the company's rule and allowed it to retain the possession of Indian territories on trust for the British Crown, but it did not specify any particular period, unlike the previous charters. This was a clear indication that the company's rule could be terminated at any time the Parliament liked. 4. It introduced for the first time local representation in the Indian Legislative Council. Of the 6 new legislative members of the Governor General's Council, 4 members were appointed by the local governments of Madras, Bombay, Bengal and Agra. Acts brought under the Crown Rule. Government of India Act of 1858. This significant act was enacted in the wake of the revolt of 1857, also known as the First War of Independence or the Sepoy Mutiny. The act, known as the Act for the Good Government of India, abolished the East India Company and transferred the powers of government, territories and revenues to the British Crown. The features of this act were: 1. It provided that India henceforth was to be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty. It changed the designation of the Governor General of India to that of Viceroy of India. He was the direct representative of the British Crown in India. Lord Canning thus became the first Viceroy of India. 2. It ended the system of double government by abolishing the Board of Control and Court of Directors. 3. It created a new office, Secretary of State for India, vested with complete authority and control over Indian administration. The Secretary of State was a member of the British Cabinet and was responsible ultimately to the British Parliament. 4. It established a 15-member Council of India to assist the Secretary of State for India. The Council was an advisory body. The Secretary of State was made the Chairman of the Council. 5. It constituted the Secretary of State in Council as a body corporate, capable of suing and being sued in India and in England. The Act of 1858 was, however, largely confined to the improvement of the administrative machinery by which the Indian government was to be supervised and controlled in England. It did not alter in any substantial way the system of government that prevailed in India. Indian Councils Act of 1861. After the Great Revolt of 1857, the British government felt the necessity of seeking the cooperation of the Indians in the administration of their country. In pursuance of this policy of association, 3 acts were enacted by the British Parliament in 1861, 1892 and 1909. The Indian Councils Act of 1861 is an important landmark in the constitutional and political history of India. The features of this act were: 1. It made a beginning of the representative institutions by associating Indians with the lawmaking process. It thus provided that the Viceroy should nominate some Indians as non-official members of his expanded council. In 1862, Lord Canning, the then Viceroy, nominated 3 Indians to his legislative council: the Raja of Benares, the Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Rao. 2. It initiated the process of decentralization by restoring the legislative powers to the Bombay and Madras presidencies. It thus reversed the centralizing tendency that started from the Regulating Act of 1773 and reached its climax under the Charter Act of 1833. The policy of legislative devolution, that is, decentralization, resulted in the grant of almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. 3. It also provided for the establishment of new legislative councils for Bengal, northwestern provinces, and Punjab, which were established in 1862, 1886, and 1897 respectively. 4. It empowered the Viceroy to make rules and orders for the more convenient transaction of business in the council. It also gave a recognition to the portfolio system introduced by Lord Canning in 1859. Under this, a member of the Viceroy's Council was made in charge of one or more departments of the government and was thus authorized to issue final orders on behalf of the Council on matters of his departments. 5. It empowered the Viceroy to issue ordinances without the concurrence of the Legislative Council during an emergency. The life of such an ordinance was 6 months. Indian Councils Act of 1892. The features of this act were: 1. It increased the number of additional, that is, non-official members in the central and provincial legislative councils but maintained the official majority in them. 2. It increased the functions of legislative councils and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. 3. It provided for the nomination of some non-official members of the Central Legislative Council by the Viceroy on the recommendation of the Provincial Legislative Councils and the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, and that of the Provincial Legislative Councils by the governors on the recommendation of the district boards, municipalities, universities, trade associations, zamindars and chambers. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button, put down your valuable comments, share and subscribe Dumbfound360. Your support will encourage us to do more videos in the future. Until then, it's KK signing off.